This is Tim Sheehan, and I'm a manager here at the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Laboratory, working in the data center group. And we're going to have a webinar today that will be talking about NVMe over Fabrics and validation and how that can help you out with your NVMe over Fabrics products. So it's about 8:01, so I think it's time to start. And as I said, NVMe-oF validation is today's topic. So here's the agenda. We'll start off with a little bit about what the IOL is, for those of you who are not aware, and then we'll jump right into the IOL INTERACT PC Edition NVMe-oF software suite. That's a mouthful. We're going to pretty much just call it NVMe-oF Interact or Interact. You'll hear it referred to, but that's the official name of the product. So what is the University of New Hampshire's Interoperability Laboratory? It's been around for 30 plus years. We primarily perform conformance and interoperability testing on network devices. We support over 28 different technology areas, of which NVMe is one of those. And we have over 140 workers here, primarily that are the graduate and undergraduate students of the university and surrounding colleges and universities. And we have about 20 full-time staff, such as myself. And we've been working with the NVMe.org for approximately 7 or 8 years now, and we've had software available to perform conformance testing for the NVMe.org for about 5 or 6 of those years. So what is the IOL INTERACT PC Edition NVMe-oF software, or NVMe-oF software? So the NVMe.org came together, and it's an organization made up of companies that are in the NVMe industry. And what they do is they come together to create the specifications for actually creating the NVMe protocols. And as part of that, there's also an ICC, or Interop and Compliance Committee. And the ICC committee actually comes up with test plans. Again, the ICC is made up of companies such as yourselves. And they come together to create test plans in order to actually make sure that the NVMe products that you're developing can actually adhere to the conformance to the specifications, but also can interoperate with other people's products out in industry. And what NVMe.org decided was that they'd like to have an actual compliance program, or what they call an integrators list. And what this means is, in order to get onto the integrators list, you need to be able to pass a certain suite of conformance tests, as well as a certain suite of interoperability tests, to make sure that your product is up to snuff to the specifications coming out of NVMe.org. And that's how the whole ecosystem works. The IOL has been chosen by NVMe.org to actually be the prime software creator for the actual integrators list software for conformance, and also to perform the testing for interoperability in order to get onto the integrators list. So what the IOL did was we created a package, a software package called IOL INTERACT PC Edition. It started off just working with PCIe devices, but has since in the last few years branched out into doing NVMe over Fabric software. And if you were to take a look at the integrators list today, you'd see from this slide that you've got quite a number of devices that are on the 3 different kinds of integrators listed that are present. You've got the NVMe PCI integrators list with 196 actual listings. You have the NVMe MI, which is management interface, with 14. And one of the fastest growing ones we have right now, as you can imagine, is the NVMe over Fabrics integrators list. This one's the fastest growing because obviously it's the latest and greatest technology that's been coming out of NVMe.org, with all the different NVMe over Fabric transports that have been coming out, such as Rocky, Fiber Channel, TCP, InfiniBand, and also iWarp. So that just gives you an idea of what's out there. Now, the IOL INTERACT tool is used in determining who gets onto the integrators list. That's one of the features that it's able to do, because it gives industry a chance to actually see your product and see what level it's at, and then it can conform to the actual specifications coming out of NVMe.org. But we've also seen an uptick in the last year or two of different companies running the Interact tool as part of their development and release process, which means it's embedded in their companies and in their QA and development to make sure that the products that they're building are actually up to the snuff of the specifications coming out of NVMe.org right during their development process, as well as it's being used right now by a lot of our clouds customers and also data center customers in order to make sure that their large number of NVMe and other storage platforms in their data center are actually baselined, and then to make sure that there haven't been any radical changes or anything or any kind of changes happening in those particular products in their data center. So really the cloud customers are definitely one that we've seen an uptick in. And it's also a great fit for customers who have software products with maybe some commodity hardware behind them to verify that each time they switch out the hardware pieces that, you know, the actual software can run correctly. So that's, again, some areas that we've seen. Now, in order to get on the integrators list at the bottom, you'll see that for hosts in an actual Fabrics environment, you need to perform and pass the interop tests that are in the interoperability test suite. And also, if you're a network product, such as a switch or something like this, or a router, you need to also pass the interop. But if you're a target device in a Fabrics test bed, then you need to make sure you can pass all of the mandatory tests in the Conformance test suite, as well as the interoperability test suite. So those are kind of the hoops that you need to jump through in order to get on the integrators list, but it's a great tool in order to market. And also it's a great tool that we're seeing these days being used for development as well as deployment in your various solutions. So what are the transports? Now the transports that you see in green right now are the ones, all 6 of these transports are actually in the NVMe specifications. You've got Rocky, TCP, Fiber Channel, InfiniBand, iWarp, and PCIe. These are all in the specifications from NVMe.org, like I said. The green ones are the ones that are actually supported today in the Interact NVMe over Fabrics software suite. The 2 orange ones, InfiniBand and iWarp, are not today actually in the Interact product. And I did mention PCIe, even though many would consider it not to be an actual transport, but it is the original product that we built here at the IOL. Now, we're not trying to block any solutions, and we'd love to work with the InfiniBand or iWarp, but right now we're kind of looking to get and achieve critical mass to make sure that we've got enough products that can actually come in and, you know, we can have Plugfests to make sure that we can run all the tests against these type of devices. And that's really the only reason why we, you know, today don't support the InfiniBand or iWarp in Interact, but we'd love to. So we tried to do it in the last couple of Plugfests that we've had here over the last year and a half, but we haven't quite attained enough there in order to do that. So if there are people on the call or who listen to this webinar, you know, after the call, love to have you get in touch with us so that we can actually, you know, implement those and get that kind of critical mass to make sure that we have all the products and that the products work correctly, and also that the Interact product works correctly. Now, I guess what you'd probably be seeing popping up on your screen right now is a poll. And this poll is just a survey question, and it's going to be concerning, you know, the preferred model for test software access. So as I talk, if you wouldn't mind just taking that poll, that'd be great. And I'll just continue to talk. Okay. Sorry about that. What this slide shows is a basic test bed setup for an NVMe-oF test. Now, this could be for either conformance testing or interoperability testing. It's the same basic setup that we use. You'll have on the left-hand side an NVMe host or initiator, and this would be the platform upon which we would actually run the Interact Conformance software. And then we're going to run it through at least a 2-switch fabric. And this is to actually simulate and emulate a fabric setup that you're going to have within your actual customer, your company or your customer's solution. And then on the right-hand side, you'd see that you've got the NVMe-oF subsystem or target where the storage actually takes place. Now, obviously, this is just a generic slide, but what you can envision is that each one of these, you know, 3 boxes in a container that you see on this slide could be substituting in any of the fiber channel products. So you'd have a fiber channel host with an HBA, with two fiber channel switches, and then a fiber channel target with an HBA again on that side, with an NVMe storage behind it. Or if you're doing something, say, like Rocky or TCP, again, you'd swap out the actual host with a TCP host, and then you would have switches, which would be regular just Ethernet switches, along with the actual NVMe-oF subsystem target, which would be a TCP NIC with NVMe targets behind it. But this is the basic setup. In a conformance testing, what we'd be doing is running the Interact NVMe-oF software on the host initiator, which would run through the fabric to the actual target. And for conformance testing, we're actually testing the target itself and its responses back. Now, in an interrupt testing suite that we have, you'd be actually performing different kinds of testing on each one of the 4 entities that you see here in the test bed. You'd be doing different kinds of hot plug, IO, as well as rebooting and things like this of each of the 4 products here to make sure that they actually are able to come up and work correctly in an interoperability fashion. So this is the test bed that you'd see for any of the testing that you'd have done, either conformance or interop, when you come to get your device onto the integrators list here at the IOL. Okay, so with that said, that's kind of what the Interact NVMe-oF software package is, how it was based and what it's based upon. And now I'd just like to go over the release schedule that we have. Right now, we are in release 11.0. That's at the bottom of the screen. That has been, we had the Plugfest back in June and July of this year, 2019, where we actually have been testing that out, and it primarily deals with the 1.3 specification of NVMe coming out of NVMe.org. We just released the Interact version 12, PCI and Fabrics, and we just released that this past week, and it has initial support for 1.4, and we'll be using that software to actually perform integrators list testing coming up at the next Plugfest, which will be here in early November. And we'll be talking more about that in just a second. And then moving forward, you've got Interact version 13 that'll be happening. It'll probably be coming out in the spring of 2020, and that'll definitely be 1.4 features that are coming out of the specs, coming out of NVMe.org. So these are all what we call major releases because they actually coincide with Plugfests, but they also coincide with the test plans being released out of the ICC committee that I mentioned earlier. The test plans, when they come out and they're actually mapped in step with the actual Plugfest, the test plan themselves, as well as the Interact software will all be named and versioned to be the exact same number. So the next Plugfest we're going to be doing is 12. The Interact software is going to be obviously version 12, as well as the test plan itself will be version 12. So it's pretty easy to follow for everybody. And then in the spring, it'll be 13, version 13 for all 3 of those. So that's the release schedule that we're looking at right now. In between these major releases, you're going to have minor releases. And we try to get minor releases out about every month, about every 3 to 4 weeks. And primarily, this is going to be any kind of an issue or feature set that we'd like to get out. It's a smaller release, as you can imagine. And it's mainly just to deal with any kind of features that we see that we'd like to add to the product. So what are the test plans specifically that we'd use to actually perform the NVMe-oF tests on the subsystems and hosts? You see at the top, you've got the NVMe base specifications. And I put in version 11 and 12 because right now we're testing version 11. But we're going to be going to version 12 here in a matter of 6 weeks. And the conformance base specification is definitely the one that's been out there for the longest period of time. And that's the primary one for conformance. And then if you look at the next one down, the interop version 11 and 12, again, this is the one that we just talked about briefly when we were looking at the actual test bed setup. And then the brand new test specification that's come out is the NVMe-oF specification. And don't be confused. This is actually NVMe-oF specification conformance testing, excuse me, that is going to be handling certain things such as discovery, connection, as well as keep alives and things like that. Whereas your base specification is going to go into a lot more of the NVMe features such as, test, get features and get properties and things like that. But these are the 3 primary test plans that you'll be using in order to actually get onto the integrators list. And in terms of the Interact software is actually implemented using the NVMe base specification for conformance, as well as the NVMe-oF specification. So come version 11 C that's coming out, that just came out, and also 12.0a, you'll see that there is the new NVMe-oF specification for conformance testing, as well as the base specification. Okay, so that's release scheduling. And then we'll just take a look at, some of the future plans coming out and what's going to be coming out in some of the tests. But also I'd like to just give you a brief demo of the actual GUI software so that you're able to see what it is and how easy and intuitive it is to use. So as I mentioned earlier, version 12 of test plan, Plugfest, and also Interact software is going to be coming out. With this new test plan, there's obviously a boatload of definitely NVMe tests that are out there, over 250 of which 53 are mandatory for NVMe-oF devices. And then if we look at the NVMe over fabrics, again, this is the newer conformance test plan that's come out. This is all, there's 10 FYI tests that come out in the OF test plan. Really, this is all FYI still. There are no mandatory tests that are in this particular test plan. Typically how it works with NVMe.org and the ICC committee, they'd like to see, the results come back from 1 or 2 Plugfests before they make tests mandatory. But you can imagine that we went through testing of this at the July and June Plugfest. We're going to do it again here in the November Plugfest. And after that point, you can see probably that these tests are going to become mandatory, but that's still to be determined based off of the results that come out of that test, the tests that happened during the Plugfest. But it's definitely a case where this could change to be mandatory, in the near future. And then, of course, you get the Interop test suite that we've talked about already a couple of times. And in order to perform the Interop testing, in order to get on the integrators list, you must be able to actually test against 2 unique test partners in order to pass those. So those are, the new features that are coming out. And if we look at the actual, version 12 of the actual test plan, there's 145 different test plan changes in it. You can take a look out on the IOL website and you can see under NVMe and then test plans, you can see that there are the version 11 test plan as well as the version 12. There's also a red line version 12, which makes it a lot easier to see what's changed between version 11 and 12. That's a great one to take a look at because it's easy. It really pops as to what's changed. There were, like we said, 145 different test plan changes. There's 26 new FYI tests in primarily those groups there. And then there's been 5 test case status changes. And typically these are the ones that are going to be going from a FYI state into a mandatory state, which means now they must be passed in order to achieve integrator list status. There are also 56 other updates to the spec, but most of those are either just grammatical or different cleanup that needed to happen as part of the process. So specifically, that's what's going to be going on in version 12. Now, what's going to be coming up that will be using this particular test plan? We're going to be doing 2 Plugfests. There'll be the NVMe-oF Plugfest that'll be happening the week of November 4th here in Durham, New Hampshire, as well as we'll be doing the NVMe SSD and MI Plugfest the next week, which would be November 11th. And we'll also be doing a webinar on October 8th that will be actually talking about the logistics of those 2 Plugfests. So, be sure to tune in for those because it'll give you the information you need in order to sign up, what to bring, what to expect, and how we'll be running the tests. In the Over Fabrics Plugfest that'll happen on the 4th, typically we do NVMe testing, but we also have done in the last couple or few Plugfests, we've been able to do some other proof of concepts such as TCP, or even Rocky was a proof of concept too a year and a half or so ago, and also doing some other testing such as data center bridging. So this is definitely something that we, be reaching out to the different customers who want to come to these events to make sure that we can do additional testing on the fabric side. And then at the very bottom, you'll see that we're actually going to be doing an NVMe SSD and MI Plugfest in the Asia area. And we're looking right now at early to mid-January. And of course, all of these events are all predicated on making sure that we have enough actual, critical mass to make sure we've got enough companies coming, targets, hosts, initiators, switches, in order to have the Plugfest be a success. So those are the events that'll be coming up shortly. And at this point, I think I'd like to start with the demo to show you what we've got. So this is the actual Interact NVMe-oF software. It's already pre-installed in the NVMe directory and the managed directory. And inside that managed directory, you'd have a couple of important files, such as the license file, as well as the actual install and run GUI, which will install if you haven't on the very first run, or would launch the GUI on any subsequent runs. When you actually install it, this is what the GUI would look like. It's a relatively simple 3-panel application. Up at the top in the header, you'd see that it's the 12.A version running on that particular system. You've got a couple of pull-down menus off of the File, Edit, and Tools, where you could do different things such as zip up logs or actually run tests. You're able to configure some of the properties for the device testing, clear some logs, or display test results, or anything else along those lines. On the left-hand panel, these are the actual tests you're going to select. Right now, you have the base conformance specification, as we've talked about, and this is the primary one that's been around for the last 7 or so years. And then we have the brand new NVMe-oF Fabrics conformance test plan, as we had just talked about too. You're able to select all tests if you wanted to run them, or you can open up each one of these tests and actually pick and choose a test you want to run. So I've just picked right now test 1.1, the identify command, just to show you that we can run it. Now, if we move over to the center panel, you see there's the beautiful IOL icon. And right below that, you've got the run button. So I selected the test on the left-hand side, and I'd select run. But if I had selected all tests to run, and for some reason I wanted to stop it, you're able to hit the cancel button once you're running. The README button will give you more information on just some helpful hints and facts on what you need to do with the product. And then any output or logs will be displayed on the right-hand panel. And if you were to select the display log button there, it gives you a more detailed log, or the display results will give you a more generic. And of course, it's run against the NVMe.o. So if I hit run, this is what comes up. I ran test 1.1. It did pass. It tells you which script you ran, what version, and it gives you a summation of all the tests that were run. Well, I only ran one, so it only shows one. It gives you where the actual logs were stored. But if I want more details about the specific test, I can actually use the display log, and this is where you'd get a lot more information about what was actually happening during that test. It gives you a lot more information about the actual tests, what was going on, versioning. It also gives you the steps that we took, such as you're sending the identify command to a namespace of 0, and that it did pass, and that the current state of that namespace is active, and so on and so forth. This is where you're going to get a lot more detailed information about what actually happened. And these tests should actually follow the test plans that are actually as on the actual IOL website too. And again, you go back to the display results and you can just get the high level overview of all the tests that have run. Down on the footer, you've got the actual status bar and a time running, which gives you a time, whereas this was only a simple test, so it was quick. You'd have the version of the specification that was run, and also just an idea of when your licensing would run out. And really, it comes down to, it's as simple as that. 3 panels, tests on the left, actual buttons on the right to make it happen, logs and statuses on the right-hand side, which are very important. And this just gives you an idea of how easy and simple it is to run, the actual Interact NVMe-oF software tool. So, thank you for that demo. And what I would say now is, if at any time you'd like to get any kind of a demo of the actual product, for those of you who haven't seen it yet or aren't a member, you're able to request a demo license for you. And basically the demo would give you the entire package, but you'd only be able to run, I think it's the first test in each one of the groups that are present in the actual NVMe-oF software. And then if there were any questions or test procedure or anything like that, you can actually send mails to the NVMe Lab mailing list, and we'd be happy to answer any of those questions. And of course, if there are any findings or improvements that you could see that you'd like to have with the product, on the right-hand side, you can see the page that we have for requesting demo. But in the upper right-hand corner, you can also see the My IOL link there, and you could go in there as a member and log in and actually add any of those findings or improvement requests that you might have. So that's the wrap up of actually talking about Interact NVMe over Fabric software tool. I hope this has been informative. Obviously, you can send any kind of a mail to myself or to the NVMe lab if you have any other further questions. But at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions that the audience might have. Okay, I see one that just came in, and it's asking about the actual supported OSs and kernels that Interact supports. So obviously the NVMe-oF Interact actually is supported. There's 3 different versions of it. There's the TCP version, there's the Rocky version, and then there's the fiber channel version. And they're all on different OSs at this point, primarily because of when things were released. We're gonna hopefully be normalizing that here in the next release or 2, so that we can get them, at least all the fabric ones, up to snuff. We'd also like to get the PCI version up to snuff too, and we're looking, we still have a couple of managerial things that we need to work out with the ICC before we do that one. But so TCP is on Ubuntu 19.1 with a kernel, 5.0 kernel, and then Rocky right now is CentOS 7 with a 4.10 kernel, and Fiber Channel is SUSE, if that's how you say it, with a SLES 12 SP3 OS with a 4.10 kernel also. So those are, you know, the OS and kernels. Let's see, I've got another question here that's asking about APIs and to use if you wanted to automate anything. And right now we don't have APIs to automate it, but with the state of the tool and how it's actually and what it's actually doing and things like that, we have recently put in what we call Auto Runner, and this is a script that's in the LDD scripts directory. It gives you the ability to run all the tests that are present in the application, so that you're able to do it like in a nightly build or any kind of a nightly testing that you might do, or even as just part of your development or data center testing practices. Right now, it is a script written in Python, and it requires Python 3 to be installed on the system. But for the most part, it allows you to run in an automated fashion all of the tests, and I think that's what you're really asking for in your question. So I've got, let's see, I've got one more, and this is asking, how long does it take to run a complete test suite? I'll just say not a long time, but really what it comes down to, it could maybe take somewhere in the order of maybe an hour, maybe 2, in order to run the complete suite. And really it depends upon the number of tests selected, obviously, and also the product under test, because some devices might take longer to do, or work on certain features such as DST or device self-test. And it's possible that's a possibility that it can take longer that way. So it's kind of tough to actually give a specific time, but it's not a long process to run the whole test suite. And if you were to, if there is any questions about pricing or anything like that, obviously our website has all the details on it. You can go there and see whatever you'd like. Yep. So we have one person saying that SLES 12 is becoming end of life, and right, we're going to be working towards upgrading all of those OS and kernels here in the next release. And I think that's about it. One other said that there's a misprint about the actual NVMe-MI SSD Plugfest. It is November 11th, and that's 2019 of this year. In the Asia event that we're going to be doing, again, if we can get enough critical mass or enough companies to actually will want to perform the Plugfest. We'll be doing that one in early January or mid-January, and we're looking at doing again, that would be for test plan 12 also. So are there any other questions? I think I've answered all the ones that are there. If there aren't any, I'd like to say thank you for attending. And, oh, I got one. When will the recording be available? Probably within a week. Oh, tomorrow, actually. I got the green light tomorrow. So that'll come out. Oh, and I just got another one in. So yes, as a target vendor, they're asking about should the test be actually run from the host? Yes, in a Fabrics environment, you'd be running the tests. Typically how we run them to get on the integrators list here at the lab is we're gonna run them on a host or initiator platform that would then, and those are the OSs and kernels that we're talking about running it on. And it would run through a simulated Fabric, a couple of switch/router setup to the actual target, and that's how the test would be run. Okay. Looks like it's quieted down again. So with that said, I'd say thank you very much for coming to the event. And if you have any other further questions, please reach out. You can go to the NVMe Lab mailing list, or you can reach out to the IOL, and we'd be happy to talk to you. And with that, I'd like to say go Pats, and have a nice day.